So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be generating an auth URL. We're then actually going to be creating basically the entire functionality of signing in here, which isn't really that difficult, to be honest. All of this stuff is documented on Google. The only problem is that it's documented in a very procedural, unreusable way. So we're going to be doing this, we're going to be writing this as sort of correctly as we can. There probably could be improvements to be made, but along the way, you can go ahead and do this. So what we want to do is, inside of index.php, remember in the last part, we need to change this. We want to call a method on auth called check token. And check token will basically, if we head over to here, be a method that's going to check whether a login token is required or whether a login token is returned, basically. So this is going to check if a session is set, if access token is set, that's the name of the session. And what's going to happen is, if that is set, we are going to basically set an access token on the client. We're going to call that method on our Google Auth client. Otherwise, we're going to return an authentication URL. Now, the last port of call, we're just going to return an empty string, because remember, we're doing an if statement here to check that. So let's take a look at what the sort of workflow we need to do within here. We need an if statement, and this is going to check if the session access token is set and whether this actually has a value or not. Or we could do not empty, to be more precise. So if that's the case, we want to say this client set access token session access token. Now this isn't actually going to happen at the moment. Now the reason this isn't going to happen is because we've not created an authentication URL and the user hasn't clicked on it. So let's do an else here, and this is actually going to generate the auth URL. So we're going to say return this client create auth URL, and this will basically just create an authentication URL for us. It knows all of our settings here because we've provided it to the client on instantiation of this object. So this has no problem doing that as long as your credentials are correct. Now, as a fallback, we're going to return an empty string. As I said, we're doing checking here if the auth URL actually has any content, and therefore we want to check if it's an empty string. We're just going to show you're logged in. So let's do an echo on the auth URL. That might be useful. Cool. So what we can see here is we can see that we've got a link that basically goes to Google. Now what happens here is we actually go through to Google. That's it. It takes us through to Google. It gives us access types, the scope, and all sorts of other information, the redirect URI as well. So this link now contains, if we inspect it, that URL. So let's not do that, and let's check what happens when we go through to this URL. Sign in with Google. I click on one of my accounts. Let's just pull this down. And it gives me all the information. This is all automatically done. We don't actually need to do much here, except, and we go back. Now what's happened is we've been provided with a code. What we also have is we should have a session set. So let's just have a look inside of resources, sessions. Oh, sorry, we don't at the moment. We will later on. We will have an access token set. And that access token is what allows us to sort of maintain that state within here. We'll keep this tab open just to keep an eye on that. So now that we've got this code, what do we do with this? Well, basically, this is our access token that's been passed back from Google that we can then use to authenticate the user. And we're going to be doing that with another method called login. But we want to create this within an if statement to check whether this was successful or not. We're going to return true or false from this method. So we're going to say if auth login. So what on earth is this login method going to do? Well, it's going to check whether a code as a get variable, which is here in the get superglobals within PHP, actually exists. In here, if we do successfully log in, we want to redirect, because if we don't redirect, this probably isn't going to work. Well, it's just nicer to redirect anyway. So we're doing that in a moment. That's not massively important now. We want to deal with this, auth login method. So in Google Auth, let's create a new method down here, public function login. So what do we need to do? We need to check if this get in this code in the get superglobals exists or is set. So we say get code. Now if it does, which it is at the moment, let's just echo out OK, and we'll see that when we refresh that says OK. Cool, so we've checked that. So now what we want to do is we want to authenticate on the client using that code that's been given back to us. So we say this client authenticate. Authenticate. Just make sure we spell that wrong. Authenticate. Yeah, we have. So we say $_get code. So that will send the code to the Google Auth API, and it will basically do all its checking on that end. We don't need to do much here. Then, as we've seen up here, we want to set the access token. Well, we want to get the access token, basically. We don't have it yet. We don't know where it comes from. But we can use the get access token method on the client to actually receive this. So we just use session access token, and you can call this whatever you want. You know, it can be whatever. This client get access token. So this, after authenticating, will receive an access token which will be stored inside of that access token. Then what we want to do is later on store user in DB. We'll be doing that later because we don't want to interfere our flow of working with Google. So in this case, I'm going to return true because I'm just going to assume that everything here has worked. You may want to incorporate some more error checking, but not really necessary. I'm going to return false outside of this, and that's basically if the code isn't set in the get superglobal array. So now what's going to happen is, if that is set, we're going to redirect. Well, not at the moment, but this should be okay. So I'm going to say echo okay. Oops, okay. So let's refresh with this code. Cool. So it still says okay. Inside of session storage, we should have... Oh no, sorry, it'll be in cookies, won't it? We have a PHP session ID. We can't actually see anything here, so may as well just close it. But basically now that's been set. We could probably prove this just by doing a var dump on... the access token, and let's just take a look at that. Oh, of course. Right, so the reason this has happened, this is actually probably quite good. We get this invalid grant error, and that's because we've already used this code to authenticate. We can't use the same code twice to authenticate because they're unique codes, they're one-use codes. So when I log out now, in actual fact I can't log out. Let's just do a clear on our cookies. That's all our cookies. Cool. So we're logged out. If you need to log yourself out while you're testing this, well, obviously we don't have a log out page included, you can go ahead and do this. Cool. So now when I sign in and I hit my account I want to use and I accept, we go back and we'll see that access token here. We did a var dump on this. We don't need to worry too much about this. We don't really need it, to be honest, but at least we know it's there and we know that we've set this inside of the access token. So once we've logged in, what do we want to do? Well, we want to redirect. So let's do a redirect on a URL. But we want to choose the URL that we want to redirect to first. We just basically want to refresh this page. There are different ways to do it. I've pulled this straight from the Google example, so I'm going to just run with it. It is obviously your server, so we concatenate on using the server globals. And that is just HTTP host. So in my case, it would be localhost with port 888. And we want to point to the current page we're on, including the path, which is PHP self. So if we just echo this out, you'll see basically what this is. We've already used this code, haven't we? So we'll have to get rid of that, sign in again. And there we go. So this is basically what we're going to be redirect back to. And so here we can do a header, location. We're obviously going to want to do a filter var on this to sanitize the URL. So there we go. So that's basically going to redirect to this specific location, pop a space and concatenate that on. So now what's going to happen is if we just get rid of this and get rid of our session, if we sign in, we'll now see us click through to here, click accept, that will go back and it's automatically redirected us. And now because we've refreshed the page, we're seeing the effect that's taken from this if statement. So auth URL hasn't been generated, it's empty, and therefore we're logged in. There are probably other ways you can do this, like checking if the access token is set, but really this is good enough for now just to check whether the user's logged in or not. You can abstract this and create a new method for it, maybe some kind of user class, whatever you want to do. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've pretty much basically just done what we need to do. I mean, we've signed the user in. We have checked that the user signed in. The only thing that we haven't done is store the user in the database. Now, because we have basically got to get this information from somewhere, we have to do something a little bit extra to store the user in the database, and that's basically get the payload from the basically verifying the ID token, getting the attributes from the user. So we'll do that later on, but in the next part I guess we'll go ahead and look at signing the user out.